The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall. I play Hera Syndulla on Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you always.
You're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, episode 173.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Hi, I'm Robert King, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, where we look at the deeper themes and meanings found in the stories and characters in the Star Wars universe. Whether they're in that galaxy far, far away or headed for another galaxy even farther, farther away. I'm going to try and make that a thing. We'll see if Angela picks it up. Today we're looking at part 5 of the Ahsoka series called Shadow Warrior. Joining me on the podcast today are Joshua Beeghley. Welcome, Josh.
Hello.
And Thomas Salerno. Good to have you back, Thomas.
Hey there. How's everybody doing tonight?
Right on. I think we're all doing fine. Now, the last episode left us with something of a cliffhanger, didn't it? Ahsoka and Anakin meeting in the world between worlds. And this episode doesn't start there. It starts with Hera and searching for Ahsoka and Sabine. But it doesn't tease us for too long. We get to see Ahsoka finish her training under her old master through a lightsaber duel and a few flashbacks to Ahsoka's youth in the Clone Wars. Meanwhile, Hera's son Jason uses the Force to guide Hera in their search for Ahsoka till she returns, floating in the sea. Ahsoka discerns that Sabine has gone away with Morgan, and so she and Huyang fly into the belly of the Purrgil, hopefully to follow them. But, who knows? So, where do we begin? I think probably the best part is the part we all want to talk about, which is the world between worlds and finishing Ahsoka's training. Let's just start. What did you think? Like, what were you expecting, and how did it meet your expectations? Like, especially Anakin's challenge, live or die.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting way to, phrase the whole conversation they had throughout the flashbacks, I guess is the way to put that, of live or die, and the sort of need for her to be a warrior, as Anakin sort of discussed throughout it. And of course, there is amazing video or cinematography throughout the whole thing of him switching back and forth between a Vader and Anakin, and like Anakin as Vader kind of thing. I absolutely loved all of that aspect to it. But I think it was really interesting to see how much he sort of forced and stressed of her needing to be a warrior and needing to be a person who's fighting instead of the keeper of the peace.
I think in broad strokes, the interaction between Ahsoka and Anakin went pretty much as I expected, but in the details, it was very different, especially that emphasis on live or die and fighting. And I feel like that was almost like a metaphor of like him trying to encourage Ahsoka to fight for life, because she's in this sort of limbo sort of existence where she's kind of between life and death almost. And he says in one of the flashbacks, if you stop fighting, you'll die. Right. And I took that to mean if she stopped fighting to cling to life, she would die and drown in the ocean. And so he's using her Clone Wars experiences to kind of, instill in her this fighting spirit to keep on living and to keep on trying to, find Sabine and finish the mission, even when she returns to the world of the living and everything is kind of, a crap show because the villains are on top right now.
At the same time, there's definitely that conversation about, is fighting the only way to stay alive? Is being a warrior the only way to be a Jedi? And I thought that was a really interesting conversation. I also thought it was like fascinating the way Anakin was, finishing her training on the one hand, but also really attacking her. Like, was he her master or was he her enemy in this sequence?
I don't know. That's definitely an interesting way of putting it. He judged a lot of her actions for being like a caring person. Like in the first flashback of one of the first battles, she went over to one of the clone troopers and was like there to support him as he was on a stretcher. And then Anakin's like, we got to keep going. It doesn't matter. Like, kind of like how they used to say, like, in the Clone Wars, like the TV series was like, they're doing their job, we'll do ours. I guess that was in Revenge of the Sith with Obi-Wan. But anyways, I digress.
What, on this show?
Yeah. No. It was a lot of lack of care for other people around him, and we have a mission to accomplish, and at the end of the day, that's what's important.
I interpreted it as more like there's definitely that aspect considering what Anakin becomes later. But I felt also it was kind of him compartmentalizing what was going on. Where it's like, okay, like we can't stop and grieve right now. Like the battle is still going on, and whether we come out of it alive or not is still up in the air, and I feel like too, you mentioned, Robert, that there's this idea of is fighting the only way to be a Jedi. That reminded me very much of one of the things that Baylan Skoll says to Ahsoka in their duel. He says, no other way.
Yes.
And that actually got me onto like my own personal theory about him. Is he perhaps a Jedi deserter? Like they said he disappeared during the Clone Wars. Perhaps he just gave it up. He's like, I'm conscientiously objecting to this war and I'm out. I don't want to do this anymore. As the
pacifist type.
No, but no, not as a pacifist. I'm objecting to this war in particular.
Okay.
Because people can do that. You can conscientiously object to a particular war that you don't think is just without being an absolute pacifist. So it just got me wondering about like where's he coming from, and there's always the possibility that he's a hypocrite. I mean, remember like Barriss did all that crazy violent stuff in the name of ending violence. Right. So there's always the possibility that the villain is kind of kidding themselves, but that's just my 2 cents on it.
Well, that kind of connects to, if Baylan is a conscientious objector, and I kind of like that theory, there's, Ahsoka in her own way is kind of a conscientious objector as well. She walks away from the Jedi Order. And, there are lots of personal reasons in that, but there's also just the question of the legacy of the Jedi as an organization. And there's a lot about legacy in this, again, Baylan in the previous episode says, your legacy is one of war and destruction. And she repeats that. My part in the legacy. Yeah. But I guess I'm wondering, is this just personal or is it like there's kind of the question of have the Jedi really fallen? Like the last episode was called Fallen Jedi, and now we've got Shadow Warrior. Have the Jedi as an order fallen and become nothing more than Shadow Warriors?
Yeah, I definitely, that's a theme I've been kind of exploring in my own thoughts about Star Wars, because just especially watching more of kind of the prequels adjacent content like Clone Wars and Rebels, which kind of bridges the gap between, you know, the two eras. It's just become more and more clear to me that like the Jedi are not the sort of, we're not seeing them in the prequels at their height. You know, we're not seeing them as the selfless protectors of the innocent, you know, the keepers of the peace. We're seeing them as the enforcers of the central government, essentially, of the Republic and its values and its priorities. And I almost feel like they as an order got too caught up in that. And you especially see this in some of the tie-in materials, including canon tie-in materials. There's a moment that sticks out to me in one of Claudia Gray's novels, Master and Apprentice, which is about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's relationship. And Qui-Gon is very upset that the Council seems to be putting the Republic's priorities before the needs of the average citizen of the galaxy. And it just seems to me that they got too caught up in that, and they start using ends justify the means stuff. I mean, Ahsoka is really young in those flashbacks. She's essentially a child soldier. You know, they essentially use teenage Padawans as child soldiers. And it was very, like, you don't really understand it, like, watching animation. I feel like the live action really drove it home for me. And I was like, like, this is very distressing, but I feel that's by design. You know, we're meant to see that this is not good. You know, what the Jedi are up to. And of course, the whole war is contrived anyway by Palpatine, you know, and they failed to see that, as Luke Skywalker mentions in The Last Jedi. They failed to see that the whole war was a plot by Palpatine to wipe them out. And so, yeah, I just feel like you know, outside of, say, you know, some of the recent novels that take place in a different time period, we have yet to see the Jedi at their true height. And we're still in the on-screen material dealing with the fallout of their fall, I guess. Yeah.
Josh, any thoughts?
I definitely want to touch on the point that you said there of how young they made Ahsoka look. I also felt like that was just terrifying to see, because at first I was like, okay, she's like a teenager, you know, like 16, 17, you know, some high schooler with some angst, you know, fun stuff there. But she looked like she was almost like 8 years old kind of thing, like barely able to do the functioning things, just kind of like still sort of figuring out who she is at that age and like what she's actually able to do. And here she is being forced to leave an army and expected to succeed and excel in this position. She has no sort of experience in anything like that, or even much of any experience in the world. And so she's just being bred as this soldier also, without being like a clone, which I think is actually really interesting there, of how the clones are bred for it, and yet she has to be trained for it in her own time, kind of thing, at her own pace.
Well, and she's chastised for her compassion for the fallen soldier. And I'm remembering in our conversation on the episode we did before the series began on just Ahsoka in general as a character. And one of the things we really sort of focused on was that compassion is central to who she is. And I'm thinking of that episode of Tales of the Jedi where you have she's just a toddler, you know, barely a year old, but she's able to have that connection with the wild animal, and that ability to connect with others is huge for Ahsoka. And I was like watching almost like that aspect of her was being deliberately and systematically driven down and driven out of her, which is a real kind of violence and abuse in a to do that to someone so young. One of my theories, because I was among those who for the first few episodes thought that Rosario Dawson was playing Ahsoka as like amazingly stoic for the Ahsoka I knew from not only the Clone Wars but especially from Rebels, like just stiff and humorless and my theory that I developed was that something really deep within Ahsoka is broken, and that my hope was that in this episode we would see that brokenness. And I think it didn't come out quite the way I expected it to, but I think that's really what we saw. This was in a sense the breaking of Ahsoka's spirit. And then I think we see her, when she does choose to not to fight back, but to live, to resist in a way, to resist the choice that Anakin is giving her. That's when she kind of reconnects with the Ahsoka that I knew from earlier shows, and I don't know, that was moving for me to see.
Yeah, because she disarms Anakin instead of outright attacking him in a way that's kind of like, almost like a turn the other cheek move, where instead of returning violence for violence, she disarms him. And I feel almost in that moment, I don't know if you guys agree with this, but I feel like maybe in that moment she also forgave him for all the things that he had done, like to her specifically. Like, I don't know. Like, I hope so, but maybe that's just me, like, projecting my desires for what their relationship would be on. But I took it as that in a way she had, integrated what had happened and moved past it at least in some form.
I don't think that she fully moved past it, but she definitely acknowledges it and feels the presence of her being the apprentice to the person who like destroyed the Jedi Order and destroyed everything.
Mm-hmm.
She definitely like accepts that truth, but that doesn't mean that it's going to sit well with her. It is, I think, probably one of the scariest things you'd have to deal with is, your master committing a genocide, and not something that you would want to have happen, but she definitely feels some guilt for that, and I think that sort of showed. And her being told the whole time that has to live up to him, and that's what he became. She doesn't want to be that, and she wants to be her own person, but she's in this legacy where she has to fill that role. But what is that role?
There's that great bit of dialogue where he's sort of trying to reassure her, all the knowledge that I have, I pass on to you, that I've received this from my master, and I'm, you are everything that I am, and there's almost this kind of metaphysical sense of passing on an identity. And she begins to question that. She's like, but if I'm everything that you are, and he cuts her off and he says, you've learned nothing. Back to the beginning. And there's a sense in which Anakin is learning a lesson through this process as much as Ahsoka is. But there's that real concern of, if she's everything that he is, what more is there? And that bit of dialogue comes out as well. What more is there than this legacy? She thinks there's more to her, and she thinks there's more to Anakin. What do you think that more is. What like, I mean, I think there's a lot more, but
perhaps she worries that that same darkness that took root and grew in him could also be in her somehow. I mean, like several people have pointed out that in her last sort of face-to-face confrontation with Anakin, her eyes kind of reflect the kind of, Sith red eyes that Anakin has in his Vader form. And so I feel like, she's dealing with that fear, like, could I become just like you? Because what he became, like, she didn't even recognize it as him. Like, if you remember from Twilight of the Apprentice, her famous line, my master could never be as vile as you. And it's like, if he could fall that far to where he's unrecognizable, like, could that happen to her as well?
Yeah. Fear of something like that happening is a crazy thing, because then eventually you'll convince yourself enough that it'll happen too. And I don't know, I also saw, I was rewatching it, and you also saw in like the last second before she chose to live, of her eyes turned yellow. And at first I was like, is that the lightsaber reflecting in it? But then it wasn't. And I was like, that's really interesting to see that she was just about on the edge there. But then, she pulled back. So she definitely sees that balance and that fear and is able to control herself, which I think is important. She still has the compassion that we were talking about and that self-control to be able to choose the right thing still.
I almost got the impression that she deliberately like changed her eyes in that moment, like almost as an act of compassion, of like showing Anakin, I could become what you are, but I'm not going to. It's a very much an apprentice becomes the master moment, I think. And of course it's in so many ways quoting from Return of the Jedi, when the fight starts with a quote from Return of the Jedi, I will not fight you. I've heard that before. And it ends in the same way as well, with throwing away the lightsaber.
I was glad that they brought back some of the Revenge of the Sith type lightsaber fight choreography. That was really cool to see again. And somebody else on YouTube mentioned this, that like, if Anakin had still, if he had possessed his Anakin body as Vader, he would have been nigh unstoppable. You really see the limitations that the machine body put on him.
Yeah, I've even read theories. I don't know if this is in canon or not, but theories that like the Emperor had designed the Vader, prosthetics and suit as a way to limit Anakin, as a way to contain him.
Certainly believable.
Yeah, rewatching the last episode and then this one, like one of the hallmarks of Balin's lightsaber style is just like the tremendous strength and physical power of his lightsaber blows, right? And yet somehow I think Anakin in these lightsaber battles managed to like even one up Balin's incredible sort of strength and power of, I really felt the impact of every lightsaber strike Anakin threw at Ahsoka. It was genuinely kind of frightening.
When he stomps into view, like, and you hear that like boom, boom, and he's flickering between Anakin and Vader, that was genuinely terrifying. I was like, okay, I'm like,
it was an amazing shot, but I can agree that it definitely made you step back a little bit, and it's like, whoa.
And did you notice that when the first thing he says after that, when he says you lack conviction, which is a very Vader thing to say, they subtly worked in a kind of machine-like echo to his voice.
Oh, I didn't notice that, but that's very cool.
Yeah.
Definitely an amazing fight. That's for sure.
Well, and I kind of loved the way that it all, we had the initial fight in the world between worlds and then the sort of two different flashback scenes. And then it comes back to a fight that begins in one of the flashbacks, but then, he kicks her and she flies off into the fog in the flashback and lands as an adult. Yeah. And it really gives the impression that this is all one protracted battle that's going on throughout this episode. And, whether it's a duel of words or a duel of blades, it's a thrilling, dramatic conflict because so much is at stake, right?
Yeah, it's literally live or die there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't leave you much room to be like, maybe they could just both be happy and, come to terms in the middle. No, it's live or die because she's still drowning during this whole time.
At the end of last week's episode, I, like everyone else, thought, okay, here we are in the world between worlds, which was an awesome concept from Rebels that I just loved. And I loved seeing it on in live action, insofar as anything is actually live action these days. It's all animation, let's be honest. But the way it progressed made me wonder if this really was the world between worlds, or if this was like something going on primarily, sort of a forced vision or a manifestation within Ahsoka's mind, kind of like Luke in the cave in Empire Strikes Back, or Rey in the kind of Hall of Mirrors in The Last Jedi. Like, is this Ahsoka's moment of encountering her own shadow, or is this real? And like, is Anakin really Anakin, or is he sort of the shadow side, or what Ahsoka fears she'll become?
Well, given how much we know George Lucas was a fan of Jungian archetypes and that kind of Jungian way of looking at psychology, and, he talked a lot about the shadow side. And, of course, Filoni is the disciple of George Lucas. So I feel like that is definitely part of what's going on here. And then now that you mention it, yeah, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? That, like, Anakin represents to her everything she fears about her own dark side.
I guess it also kind of answers in a way for me the question of, like, oh, now I'm going to get the name, the sort of owl creature that follows Ahsoka around in Rebels. The Morai?
Morai, the daughter.
Morai, yeah. Josh, you were bringing up before the podcast the idea that, Anakin is in a lot of fan theories is being thought of as stepping into the role of the son, and of course we're talking about the overlords or the gods of Mortis, which is a really interesting 3-episode arc in the Clone Wars, and everyone should go watch them because they're some of the best Clone Wars episodes. Yeah, Josh, what do you think?
So I'll at least partially explain the fan theory aspect to it, of the fact that it couldn't have been Anakin's Force ghost because it used the dark side and his eyes turned yellow, which means that, like, they can't become Force ghosts because they're selfish and stuff. But the father was this character who was in the middle, had the balance of both good and evil, and was able to control himself and control both sides of, like, the coin. With that, I feel like he was very much in that role at that time of being both good and bad, of showing her the fear side of things and what she could become. I put that in quotes because it's like she could become like a Vader's disciple, a Vader's apprentice, or she could become this kind, caring person that she sort of grew up as. And we saw a little bit more of that, I guess, in his Anakin's love relationship with him being someone who cares genuinely, which ultimately you could argue that all of his actions were out of care and love as to what he became. But yeah, I definitely see him, if not as the father figure, a father figure to Ahsoka. I mean, we see that sort of with the master apprenticeship anyways, that they become a father role, that it sort of can help guide them through that way.
Yeah, even though, like, getting back to the child soldier thing, Ahsoka was, like, I think she's canonically 14 at the time of the beginning of the Clone Wars. Anakin is 19. He's not that much older than her.
Yeah.
And he's put into this figure, this role of fathering and mentoring a young girl through an impossible situation of warfare.
They're all brutalized, essentially.
Yeah.
And I feel like the more I think about the prequels, like, the more relevant I find them in terms of, like, recent history and, like, current events, where it's like, we're showing a society that is becoming desensitized to violence. Like, I mean, because all their enemies are robots, so they can just blow them up without consequences. But that kind of almost desensitizes them later to, like, accepting a government like the Empire that can perpetrate heinous atrocities, because they begin to look on all their enemies as just robot-like. Well, they're not really, like, alive or like people. They're just the enemy. And to think of, like, that, like you said, putting this whole generation of young people, both Padawans and young Jedi Knights, into this situation, it just must have been, like, horrifying. I feel like, the prequels really bring out that kind of, like, the horror aspect of modern warfare, and we all know that, again, this is another thing from the mind of George Lucas, because when he was writing the original Star Wars 2, he had Vietnam on the mind. A very controversial war in which there was a lot of talk about people becoming desensitized to violence and brutalized by, a war where the justice of it was not clear to people. Mm-hmm. And I think that the Clone Wars kind of represents that, even more so than any other Star Wars thing I've seen. And it's just like, yeah, and it's funny because my views on this have really evolved, because I used to be someone, like, when in my 20s, where it's like, the prequels, who cares? But, like, now I act like, and I admit they have flaws, but I'm like, I see them as, like, as trying to speak to these kind of deeper issues and social commentary, which I think is really fascinating.
I feel like we can maybe move on to the next sort of part of the episode, but I want to make sure that we've covered everything we want to say about this really incredible and I think absolutely central to the Ahsoka series sequence of, Ahsoka and Anakin in the world between worlds. Any other thoughts or anything we've missed in our conversation so far?
I think the only last thing I have to say about it is the whole eyes thing, I guess, for Jedi and Sith is an important thing. But it was also, at the very end, that last exchange, I guess, between Anakin and Ahsoka, where Ahsoka's eyes turned yellow and then back to blue. And then Anakin, like, calmed himself down and put himself back into the blue, showing that he had, like, this full control over it all and was able to sort of show her that way as well, of, I guess, giving her the lesson as well to be able to balance herself between the two of good and bad, or enraged and not.
That's interesting. I think I took it the opposite way, that Ahsoka had showed Anakin, or at least the Anakin, whatever was appearing as Anakin in this sequence, how to do that. I read Anakin as being lost in the dark side, and Ahsoka was showing him how to kind of find himself again.
Maybe a bit of both.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely see it both ways. It's just interesting to me that it like struck us differently.
Because in my mind, I also see it as him passing knowledge on to her, but she did it first. So if all of the knowledge that he had was already in her, then he taught her how to do it.
I would also just mention about this whole sequence that it struck me very much as the baptism symbolism was very much there, where Ahsoka experiences a kind of death, but she's reborn through water, and as we say in Christian baptism, we die in Christ and we are born again through water and the Spirit, and we put aside the old man, as she kind of puts aside those, the old her, almost those things from her past, from her traumatic past. And to the point, the baptism symbolism is so striking, to the point that after she's drawn up out of the water, she's clothed in a white robe like a Christian initiate.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt and it took me a while. This did not click right away for some reason. Only after thinking about it later, I was like, oh, this is definitely baptism imagery. And it's like the second Star Wars show in a row to be heavily focused on a kind of baptism. Like, it wasn't as overt maybe as The Mandalorian.
I have bathed in the living waters. Yes.
Yeah. And it's very much ritualized and stuff like that, where it's like a rite of initiation. But in this, the baptism, and that's a common motif in fiction. I think it's baked into a lot of, Western writers, whether they want to admit it or not. We have 2,000 years of Christianity in the West, and that all doesn't get, thrown out right away just because the culture is more secularized now. They keep returning to these kind of, Judeo-Christian motifs, and baptism is a huge one. You find it in all kinds of fictional stories.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's part of the, part of the hero's journey, which grew out of, that theory of story grew out of Joseph Campbell's sort of archaeological psychology, and which, George Lucas was a very deliberate student of. And the particular Christian imagery of baptism as being the way of, entering into death and then returning to life. It's interesting that Filoni is using that imagery. I don't know what Filoni's personal faith is, and I went trying to do some research and figure it out, and he's pretty close-lipped about that aspect of his life, which is, fine. That's absolutely his right, but it is interesting that so much Christian imagery is coming out.
I am pretty sure he said that he does use Christian or like Christianity-based motifs and symbols as one of his main things as well, at least. Because I'm pretty sure every single episode we've been on to, we've picked out plenty of things that they've done that can relate to Christianity.
Yeah.
But also as a means for them to help tell the plot, because I don't know, water is such a fundamental thing even outside of religion, and you can take that as it was something that she very much needed to be able to continue her journey. Is she needed to go through the water, get this, what do you call it, like necessity of her final training done.
that choice to live rather than to live in life rather than to live in the death of her past, maybe.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it.
So much good stuff here.
But there's more.
One of the things that our conversation has really done for me, though, is highlight the contrast between the relationship between Ahsoka and Anakin and the relationship between Jason and Hera that we really see playing out in the sequences where they are searching for Ahsoka and Sabine. The way that Jason, and I don't know how old Jason is supposed to be here. I'm guessing about 10 to 11 years old. Is that how he reads to you guys?
He looks about the age of my little sister, who's 9. So
yeah,
close enough.
So again, a child in a military setting. Mom's a general, but definitely not made into a soldier. Yeah, I don't know. I just loved the way. I mean, from the beginning, Hera has always been the mother of the crew, but here she's an actual, like, a natural mother as well as a figurative mother. And I found it like a really strong example of good mothering. The first thing I'm thinking of is Jason is like on the edge of the cliff, kind of looking out, and Hera is talking to Carson, and they're talking about, how the Republic High Command is going to be demanding that they come back, and they've got these political problems that they're dealing with, and Jason says, "Hey, Mom," and she starts with, "Just a sec, Jason," and he's like, "No, really, hey, Mom, I need your attention." And she turns and gives him her attention. And you can see her like balancing these two different kinds of demands on her attention and on her responsibility. But the way she listens to Jason, like, doesn't tell him what to do and doesn't interpret for him, but like listens and then makes her decision based on what she's hearing from him. I thought that was like such a great example of like good, mature mothering.
Yeah, she takes Jason and what he has to say seriously.
Yeah.
She doesn't just blow him off. And then, by the way, I couldn't help thinking in that whole sequence where, Jason is the first one to hear the lightsabers. He's open to it. I couldn't help but think of the gospel verse, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear."
Yeah.
Which is, I looked this up. That's Matthew 11:15 for anyone who's interested. But yeah, I just like he's open to the Force. He's open to, he doesn't just see things as they are almost. He's aware of the kind of deeper, layers of what's going on around him. And the Jedi often talk about being aware.
Well, and Hera again is like aware of what's going on around her as well, and it's not like she's just completely giving him free rein. She's very careful about making sure the place is safe so that when he first comes out of the ship, and making sure Chopper's with him to make sure everything's going to be okay. Yeah, I'm not sure Chopper's the best babysitter. But at least there's somebody irresponsible around to take care of him. But yeah, she very much wants him to be who he is, with like no expectations and openness herself to who he is. And that's really inspiring and kind of heartwarming, for me at least. I love my mother, but she was not perfect in every respect. And so seeing like such a strong model of good motherhood was like really it really kind of connected with me in a way I didn't expect.
It really, for me, just cements Hera again as one of my favorite, like, post Disney acquisition, like, new characters.
Yeah.
I just love Hera. She's just such a great addition to the Star Wars mythology. And yeah, this was just, yeah, I just love it. That's all I have to say about it. I want more of this relationship. I want to see these characters continue on into the future and see, you know, how their mother and son relationship grows. Oh, and did you guys notice Jason is wearing like one of his father's shoulder pauldrons?
Yeah.
That was neat.
I think that also sort of ties on what I was going to say of how much he actually acts like his father, too. And sort of even with the sense of the Force of feeling everything around him was very much a Kanan and Ezra thing to do, was be very grounded and connected with the nature around them and understanding what's going on. And I think Hera, being the good mother, sees that as part, like a trait of his father, and is willing to help him grow it as much as possible, and letting him sort of teach her about it along the way too, of tell me what you're seeing, what you're feeling, how you feel it, kind of thing, so that way she can be a better supporting person for him there to help the situation at hand.
Well, and then they, you know, thanks to Jason's sensitivity and Hera's attention to him, they do find Ahsoka and bring her back. And as you said, she comes back dressed in white robes, like someone coming back from baptism. I've seen a lot of comparisons to Gandalf the White, you know, Gandalf the Gray becoming Gandalf the White. And I had never thought of Tolkien. I wonder if baptismal imagery was in Tolkien's mind when he wrote Gandalf's fall and return. That connection had never occurred to me before, but kind of in a back connection from Ahsoka, it's like, oh, maybe.
I think you're right, because Gandalf says he passes through water before he comes back.
Yeah.
He's like through fire and water.
And through water, yeah. And great darkness, yeah. How do you think Ahsoka is different when she comes back? How is Ahsoka the White different from Ahsoka the Gray?
A lot more carefree, it seems. I feel like in the first few episodes, she was very much like, we have a mission, we need to get it done. Here's our plan. Here's our like objectives. Let's follow the plan. And then she's just like, gets in a Purgle's mouth, is like, it'll take us wherever.
Yeah.
You know, it's better than here. So she definitely seems very much, at least more connected with the Force, it seems, and is willing to let the path reveal itself, and whatever happens, happens. Which I think is a very important thing to notice, is that she can't control everything, and she has to just embrace life. You know, she chose to live, and she's living it up in the Purgle.
Hey, I didn't even know this was on my bucket list, but scratching it off my bucket list. Thomas, what do you think?
And very much a Jonah reference as well, perhaps.
Oh, yeah.
It's like only once Jonah is put into the whale, he's swallowed by the great fish, is he put on the path he's supposed to be on. Because the great fish deposits the great fish deposits Jonah on the shores of Nineveh. So he's getting to where he needs to go, whereas, you know, now Ahsoka's finally perhaps on the route she needs to be following.
Yeah, again, that biblical and that Christian imagery is like really prominent. Literally space whales, literally going into the belly. So on my latest rewatch, I was like, I again love the sort of very carefree, you know, Huyang is asking, you know, so you're sure that this will take us to Ezra? And she says, no idea. We'll just see where it goes. But then at the end of the very end of the episode, it quotes Empire Strikes Back, where she's talking with Hera, and she says, "I'll find them, I promise." Just like Lando says to Leia at the end of Empire. And I don't know. I was wondering, is there a tension between those? Like the "I promise I'll find them, but I have no idea where I'm going," or is it a "I know I'll get where I need to go in the end. The journey is going to be whatever the journey is"?
I feel like it's a bit more of that one there of, they'll get there. I mean, obviously they have to, but actually they don't even really have to. Sabine could be the one to bring them back. We don't know what's happening with her right now on the ship, but she'll find her way. That's for sure. And if not, she can sing some space shanties.
Yeah, now I'm imagining Ahsoka and Huyang harmonizing on space shanties. Oh, that would be fantastic. David Tennant would be down for it.
Absolutely.
By the way, I am just loving Huyang and David Tennant's performance.
Oh, yes.
Just the combination of wry humor and like just dead delivery is fantastic.
His little interaction with Jason.
Yes.
Can I build a lightsaber? No.
Yeah.
It's very much the best comedic relief a robot can bring. So,
yeah.
I just love to see it all. It's definitely a good character, that's for sure. One of my favorite robots out there.
Yeah.
And like, given that David Tennant, I know he's coming back as Doctor Who, right? And I'm like a complete noob. Like, I've maybe seen maybe one episode of Doctor Who in my whole life, but I'm like, I like David Tennant as Huyang, so if his Doctor Who performance is anything at all like this, I'm down for that. That gets me more excited.
I mean, I like David Tennant whatever he's in. I liked him in Jessica Jones. I liked him in Broadchurch, and he is still my favorite of the new Doctor Who's. I don't know what's going to happen when he comes back as the new Doctor. It's going to be transitional because they also have the next Doctor Who lined up. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting little story arc. And we'll leave that to the secrets of Doctor Who to discuss. Oh, man. Like, I feel like we could just go around and round and talk about this episode for hours, but we're running close to time. Any last thoughts or speculations?
Hondo comes back.
Hondo!
I wish. No.
Yeah, Ahsoka and Sabine try to rescue Ezra, but Hondo rescues Ezra because it's always Hondo who rescues Ezra.
That would be very nice to see a live action Hondo. But I doubt that'll happen.
Yeah.
In terms of what I don't want to see next episode, and this is something that came out of a discussion I was having with my brother, because he very much thought that we may get this next episode. I don't want to have to see like a whole episode devoted to Hera's court-martial or like part of an episode. I hate court-martial episodes in sci-fi. I don't like those kind of episodes. And so I hope that we just focus on the other galaxy, and that they can tell us in some line of dialogue what happens with the Republic Senate Committee or whatever. I don't want to see them.
Right on. I think I'm on board with you there.
I think they did a nice way of refocusing it back onto Ahsoka there, of sort of having them part ways at least. So hopefully we don't get that episode.
Yeah. Although I was loving so much the Hera and Jason dynamic. I hope they don't drop them out of the series altogether. So much to talk about, so much to say. And, we would love to hear what you, our dear listeners, have to say as well about Ahsoka, about Sabine, about Hera and Jason, about the whole Star Wars universe. Join our conversation on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. We are on the app formerly known as Twitter at SQPN. My favorite place for conversation is our Discord server. You can get an invite there at our website, sqpn.com/Discord. Or you can just go old school and drop us an email at starwars@sqpn.com. We are always grateful to our patrons who make it possible to create this podcast. Tonight, we'd like to include Sebastian G., Elizabeth F., Michael F., Jeremiah N., and Paul O. Thank you so much. Your generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Wars and all the shows at StarQuest. And any of you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give.
This StarQuest show was brought to you in part by Sam Castry Law, LLC, focusing on business and entertainment law in the greater Chicagoland area and intellectual property law across the U.S. Learn more by visiting castrylaw.com, CASTREE law.com. Licensed to practice in Illinois and before the United States Trademark Office.
It also really helps us when you subscribe to the podcast in any of the platforms that you use. We're on all the major sites. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and, the rest, wherever fine podcasts are found. We've even got an SQPN YouTube channel. Naturally, the best place to find all of our episodes is on our website, sqpn.com/Star Wars. And you can also explore all the other shows that StarQuest offers. Like we said, Doctor Who, we've got Star Trek, we've got the Mysterious World of Jimmy Akin, we've got all kinds of great shows to listen to. We even have some good merch to pick up. That's great. T-shirts, mugs, the cool stuff. So until next time, when we'll be discussing part 6 of Ahsoka, Thomas, thank you for sharing with me the secrets of Star Wars.
Thanks so much. It's been a blast.
And Josh, it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Always happy to join.
Right on. I have been Robert King, and thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy, The Secrets of Stargate. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Stargate.